Death zone is the area above 26,000 feet. So many more accidents, fatalities have happened above 26,000 feet that it's gained this name, and it deserves this name in this respect.
At the roof of the world, where triumph meets terror, Mount Everest guards secrets few dare to face. It is a mountain of glory and of ghosts. Legends whisper of vanished climbers, strange tracks in the snow, and a valley painted in colors that chill the soul. These aren't tales of fantasy, but mysteries carved into ice. Are you ready to uncover what Everest refuses to surrender? Sherpa's attack. Mount Everest is often seen as a place where climbers find beauty and transcendence. But in 2013, a shocking conflict shattered that image. British mountaineer John Griffiths and two teammates expected challenges from ice, storms, and altitude, not from the Sherpas they relied upon for support. What began as a dispute over climbing etiquette quickly spiraled into a violent confrontation. The Sherpas accused the climbers of ignoring agreed routes and disrespecting sacred rules of the mountain. To outsiders, it may have seemed like a minor misunderstanding, but among Sherpas, it was an insult that demanded a response. By the time Griffiths and his team returned to camp, nearly 100 masked Sherpas had gathered with rocks and sticks in hand. They shouted threats and swarmed the climbers' tents, ready to unleash their anger. Trapped at 21,000 feet in the thin air of Camp 2, the foreign climbers had nowhere to run. They pleaded for calm, but the mob only grew louder. The mountain, normally feared for avalanches and frostbite, now felt more dangerous because of human rage. The incident revealed a hidden tension. For Sherpas, Everest isn't a playground or a trophy. It is their home, their livelihood, and their sacred ground. What saved Griffiths and his friends was not their strength, but unexpected allies. A few seasoned climbers, including Melissa Arnaud, stepped in to negotiate and cool the fury. Her voice of reason convinced the Sherpas to stand down, and the foreign team retreated off the mountain. Though no lives were lost, the event remains a reminder that Everest is not just ice and stone. It is also shaped by people, pride, and fragile trust. If you think this one is jaw-dropping, wait until you see the next one. The Mystery of Mallory and Irvine. In 1924, George Mallory and Andrew "Sandy" Irvine set out to climb Everest with a single burning goal: to be the first humans to stand on its summit. They were last seen through a telescope, two tiny silhouettes, less than 1,000 feet from the top, before a storm swallowed them. The world has debated ever since. Did they reach the summit nearly 3 decades before Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay made history in 1953? What makes the mystery so gripping is that both triumph and tragedy are possible answers. If they succeeded, the mountaineering record books would need rewriting. If not, it underlines how close ambition can come to glory before fading into silence. When Mallory's frozen body was discovered in 1999, lying face down on a snowy slope, the clues only deepened the mystery. His camera was missing, the one object that could have provided proof of success. Even stranger, the photograph of his wife Ruth, something he vowed to leave on the summit, was nowhere to be found. Did he plant it at the peak as promised? Or did the winds tear it away as he fell? Each unanswered question keeps the debate alive, nearly a century later. What remains certain is the courage of the two men. Irvine, only 22 years old, had been chosen for his skill with the primitive oxygen equipment that made their attempt possible. Mallory, older and more experienced, believed Everest was a challenge that had to be faced because it is there. Their disappearance left behind more than speculation. It created Everest's greatest unsolved riddle, one that still shadows every climber who dares to follow their path. Haunted Mountain. Mount Everest isn't only the tallest mountain on Earth, it has also earned a reputation as a place where the living and the dead seem to meet. Climbers have long reported unsettling encounters on its slopes. Whispers in the wind, phantom footsteps trailing behind them, and fleeting shadows moving across the ice when no one else was near. At such extreme altitudes, hallucinations are common. But the number of similar stories suggests something more chilling. Many believe the mountain carries the restless spirits of those who perished, forever wandering the trails they could not complete. One of the most unnerving accounts came from Sherpa Pemba Dorje. In 2004, he claimed to see dark, human-like figures rising out of the snow, arms stretched out as if begging for help. To him, they were not illusions, but the lost souls of dead climbers, trapped between two worlds. Others have described hearing voices calling their names or feeling icy touches on their shoulders. These moments often arrive at night in the death zone, where thin air leaves climbers weak and vulnerable, amplifying the terror of what they cannot explain. Skeptics argue these visions are the brain's reaction to oxygen deprivation, exhaustion, and fear. Yet, the consistency of these experiences has created a legend of Everest as a haunted mountain. Whether ghosts or the tricks of a failing mind, the effect is the same. Climbers are reminded that Everest is more than rock and ice. It is a place where nature and mystery collide, where not all who walk its paths are alive. The Zone of No Return. Above 8,000 meters, Everest becomes something entirely different. This region, chillingly known as the death zone, is where oxygen levels are so low that the human body begins to shut down. Even with supplemental oxygen, every breath feels inadequate, every movement like dragging a weight through water. Muscles deteriorate, thinking becomes clouded, and survival depends on how quickly climbers can ascend or descend. For many, it is less a test of strength and more a race against their own failing body. In this brutal stretch of the mountain, most fatalities occur. Climbers stumble into exhaustion, disoriented, sometimes sitting down in the snow to rest and never rising again. Temperatures plummet, storms roll in without warning, and even the most prepared teams can lose their way. Sherpas call it the zone of no return because once you cross into it, turning back alive is never guaranteed. To abandon the summit is heartbreaking. To continue may be fatal. It is here that Everest exposes its true nature, indifferent to ambition or preparation. Perhaps the most terrifying reality is how quickly the zone strips away humanity. Passers-by know that stopping for too long can lead to their demise when they come across climbers in distress. Thus, it leaves behind bodies, which turn into terrible landmarks frozen in the positions of their last struggle. The zone is not only a physical boundary, but also a psychological one, pushing climbers to face death with every step taken. Glory and doom often travel the same narrow path, and on Everest, that path becomes razor-thin in the death zone. Strange sounds. When the sun disappears behind Everest's peaks, the mountain takes on an entirely different character. Climbers who rest at night often report being startled awake by deafening noises that echo through the valleys, roars that seem to shake the ice itself. Veteran mountaineer Dave Hahn, who has summited Everest more than a dozen times, described hearing violent cracks and booms that made him believe the mountain was alive. The sounds came without warning, rolling through the dark and leaving climbers uneasy, unsure whether danger was near or if the mountain itself was speaking. Subsequently, scientists clarified that these sounds were not supernatural but generated by the glaciers while under stress. The rapid cooling up to sunset permits the ice sheets to expand and then crack, sending huge slabs of ice thundering down the slope. Such impacts produce thundering echoes that carry for great distances over rock and snow. You could say that this is a voice from a mountain always on the move, proving the fragility and instability of the frozen walls of Everest. Well, what makes such sounds a terror to the climber is knowing what they signify. In those thin airs where fear already grips their minds, the sounds start feeling almost personal. The booms remind them that the mountain is shifting beneath their feet, and a trail that seemed secure just an hour earlier could well vanish before dawn. In Everest, silence is often a sign of safety. Noise is all too often an omen that the mountain is about to take another piece of itself, or that of a life. Yeti footprints. In 1951, British mountaineer Eric Shipton captured photographs that ignited one of Everest's strangest legends. While scouting a route on the mountain's icy slopes, he stumbled upon a line of massive footprints stamped into the snow. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, far too large for a human, yet oddly human-like, with 5 distinct toes. Shipton measured them, photographed them, and brought the evidence back, sparking a global frenzy. To many, this was undeniable proof of the Yeti, the mythical, abominable snowman said to roam the high Himalayas. The mystery deepened when samples of strange fur, reportedly found near the prints, were tested decades later. Scientists discovered they didn't match any known animal, but bore similarities to an ancient species of bear thought to be long extinct. The findings only fueled speculation. Were the prints evidence of a lost branch of evolution, or of a creature yet to be documented? Sherpas, who live in the shadow of Everest, tell stories of a towering, shaggy beast that moves swiftly across the ice at night, stealing livestock and vanishing before it can be tracked. Skeptics labeled the prints human-made distortions, reshaping ordinary tracks into monstrosities. But the legend continues, enlivened by more eyewitnesses among climbers and local residents. For those uninitiated in the mystery of the Yeti, it is the last untrammeled secret of Everest. A caveat that despite all the satellites and science, the mountain has secrets it keeps beyond our understanding. Until more forensic evidence is found, those odd footprints shall remain an unsolved riddle on snow. The scariest day. On April 25, 2015, Everest shook in a way few could have imagined. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake ripped across Nepal, triggering avalanches that thundered down the slopes of the world's highest peak. Jim Davidson, a seasoned climber and geologist, was at Camp 1 when the ground beneath him convulsed. Within seconds, walls of snow roared toward the tents, burying everything in their path. 18 climbers dead on Everest that day, while nearly 9,000 lives were lost across Nepal. For those trapped on the mountain, survival became a matter of endurance, patience, and sheer luck. Davidson is probably thoughts somewhere in thin air for days, helping others while awaiting for rescue. Supplies were low, means of communication had already failed, and fear hovered heavily over each camp. Eventually, survivors were helicoptered off the ice. But that cruel day has left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. It was sort of the deadliest tragedy in Everest's history, an exposure of the vulnerability of even the best-prepared climbers should the Earth become hostile. There are neither skills nor any means that could have foreseen or prevented the happenings of those dreadful minutes. What sets Davidson's tale apart is what followed after the main body of this story was concluded. A year later, Davidson again faced the mountain that nearly ended him. The month's training for Everest only made it sweeter when he stood on the summit and texted his wife, "I am standing on top of the world." To him, climbing Everest was not just about standing atop the highest peak. It was a test of endurance to show that even on the scariest of days, the will to survive came into being. Wildlife. When most people think of Everest, They imagine a frozen wasteland where nothing could possibly survive. Yet the mountain is alive with creatures that defy its brutal conditions. High on the slopes, at nearly 22,000 feet, lives the Himalayan jumping spider, one of the highest-dwelling predators on Earth. These tiny hunters feed on wind-blown insects carried up the mountain, clinging to cracks in the rock where few other species can endure. Even in a place where humans struggle to take a single step, life has found a way. Lower down, the picture shifts to larger and more surprising animals. The elusive snow leopard prowls the valleys, its gray coat blending seamlessly into the cliffs. Himalayan tars, stocky, horned goats, cling to near-vertical slopes, grazing where no other grazer dares. Black bears wander the forests near the base, while red pandas, rare and solitary, hide among the bamboo thickets. These animals have adapted to a world where temperatures plunge without warning and food is scarce. Their survival is not luck, but evolution honed over thousands of years. Unusual species identification around Everest has been a topic of inquiry for scientists for decades. Strange grasshoppers were unearthed in 1924 during an expedition, the like of which had been nowhere else on the planet, proof that Everest harbors life forms that are both unique and resilient. A shocker and reminder for mountaineers: Everest is not simply a climbing mountain. It is a delicate ecosystem, a high-altitude refuge where survival takes forms few would think it has. Against the odds, these creatures endure where humans can only borrow time. Ready your popcorn, because this next one is on another level. Russians' expedition. In 1952, a year before the world celebrated Hillary and Tenzing's ascent, whispers spread of a secret Soviet mission to conquer Everest from the north. According to scattered reports, the climbers carried not only ice axes and ropes, but also small statues of Lenin and Stalin, intending to plant them on the summit as proof of Soviet supremacy. But the team never returned. The Soviet Union denied the expedition even existed, burying any trace beneath layers of Cold War secrecy. For decades, the Russian expedition lived only in rumor, a ghost story among mountaineers. The mystery resurfaced in 2017 when rescuers searching for a missing Slovak climber stumbled upon 4 frozen bodies in a tent at 26,000 feet. No official expedition had been reported missing that year, and none of the corpses matched known climbers. The discovery raised unsettling questions. Were these the Soviets who vanished more than 60 years earlier? If so, why had their remains never been documented? And how did they survive so long in the death zone, preserved in silence until chance uncovered them? This is all what historians do. They'll point to things bigger than mountaineering. Had the Soviets attained success in 1952, to them, the story of Everest would remain one of unreal expectations from the Cold War, instead of being a global triumph only a year later in 1953. Rather, there is a tale of refusal, disappearance, and intrigue. Everest has always required sacrifices, but the Russian expedition stands as a reminder of the mysteries seeded by human aspirations, secrecy, and politics. An enigma as enduring as the mountain itself. Julius Sturck. Julius Sturck, often nicknamed the Swiss Machine, was a legend in modern mountaineering. Known for his unmatched speed and technical brilliance, he had conquered peaks that left others humbled, setting records that seemed impossible. His dream was audacious: to climb Everest from both the Nepalese and Tibetan sides in a single expedition. Few doubted his ability. Sturck had the stamina, precision, and daring that defined the elite. For him, Everest was not just a mountain, but the ultimate stage to push human limits further than ever before. However, in April 2017, that dream came to a tragic end. While ascending a familiar route near the western approach, Steck lost his footing and fell almost 300 yards. The potential causes are uncertain: melting snow, unstable ice, or simply a momentary slip in the thin air. For a climber who was known for his grace and control on the mountain, such an instantaneous slip seemed, tragically, almost unimaginable. Teammates could only look on from afar while the mountain claimed one of its best competitors. His death sent shockwaves through the mountaineering fraternity, reminding everyone that even the strongest can fall prey to Everest's treachery. Steck's journey became a bittersweet epitome of precariousness, the difference between success and failure at exceedingly high altitudes. The peculiarities of his passing served as a loud reminder of how strange the mountain has become in times of warm temperatures when once solid ice is now undermined. In many ways, his fall symbolized more than personal tragedy. It reflected how Everest itself is changing, more unstable, more treacherous, and perhaps less forgiving than ever before. Massive poop. Everest may inspire awe, but hidden beneath its white slopes is a problem few climbers want to talk about: human waste. Each year, thousands of climbers and trekkers journey toward the summit, and together, they leave behind an estimated 12,000 pounds of excrement. With no sewage system and no soil to absorb it, the waste doesn't decompose. It simply piles up, trapped in the snow and ice, or washed down toward streams that supply water to local villages. What should be the world's most pristine environment has, in many areas, become a high-altitude latrine. The issue isn't only about the mountain's beauty, it's a growing health hazard. Climbers often refuse to carry waste back with them, leaving it in pits or burying it in shallow snow that eventually melts away. Locals who live downstream have reported stomach illnesses and contaminated water sources. Scientists testing glacier runoff have found alarming levels of bacteria linked directly to human waste. The very mountain worshipped for its purity now carries the signature of overcrowding and poor sanitation. Authorities have tried solutions: biodegradable bags, stricter cleanup rules, and even financial deposits that climbers only get back if they return with their waste. Yet enforcement remains difficult, and the scale of the problem keeps growing. The toilet problem on Everest is more than an inconvenience. It is a sign of how human ambition is reshaping the mountain. For every flag planted on the summit, tons of waste remain below, turning the roof of the world into a warning about what happens when nature is pushed beyond its limits. Marine fossils. At first glance, Everest seems like the ultimate symbol of land rising toward the sky. Yet scattered across its upper slopes are remnants of a very different world: fossilized shells and traces of ancient sea creatures. These strange finds are not myths. Geologists have confirmed that marine fossils exist even near the summit, 29,000 feet above sea level. For many climbers, spotting them is a surreal experience. One moment, they are battling ice and thin air. The next, they are staring at the imprint of an ocean animal locked in stone. How can the world's highest point also be a graveyard for creatures that once lived underwater? The answer lies in the science of plate tectonics. Millions of years ago, the land that is now the Himalayas was submerged beneath the Tethys Ocean. When the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate around 50 million years ago, the seabed buckled and rose skyward, eventually becoming the Himalayas. Everest itself is built from these layers of ancient limestone and shale, carrying fossils that serve as evidence of its underwater past. What seems like the ultimate conquest of rock and ice is, in reality, the remains of a vanished ocean. Still, the fossils stir debate beyond geology. Some see them as evidence supporting flood legends, while others simply marvel at how Earth can transform so violently over time. For climbers gasping in the death zone, stumbling across seashells in the rock is more than a curiosity. It is a reminder that even Everest was once swallowed by water, and that the mountain's story is older and stranger than human ambition. The tale of Maurice Wilson. In 1934, Maurice Wilson, a decorated World War I veteran, set his sights on Everest. Unlike other climbers of his time, Wilson had no mountaineering experience, no technical training, and little knowledge of the mountain's brutal conditions. What he did have was an unshakable belief that prayer and fasting had cured his illness years earlier, and he was determined to prove that faith alone could carry him to the summit. His plan was reckless but bold. Fly a small plane from England to Tibet, crash land near the mountain, and then walk to the top. Against all odds, he nearly pulled it off. Wilson's journey up Everest was as strange as it was tragic. Sherpas who accompanied him begged him to turn back when he reached an impassable ice wall, but Wilson refused, convinced divine power would see him through. His diary reveals a man both driven and delusional. In one of his final entries, he wrote, "This will be a last effort before pushing higher." A few days later, he was found dead in his tent, likely from exhaustion and exposure. His dream had ended just short of glory. For many, Wilson embodies both the madness and magnetism of Everest. He was neither a hero nor a fool, but something in between. A man who treated the mountain not as a challenge of skill, but as a stage for spiritual proof. His failed attempt left behind no summit photo, no victory, only questions. Was it faith or folly that carried him into the death zone? Nearly a century later, his story remains one of the strangest chapters in Everest's history. The Guardian Angel. In 1975, British climbers Dougal Haston and Doug Scott stood on the summit of Everest, but their triumph came too late in the day. Darkness fell, and with no oxygen, no food, and no chance of descending safely, they faced a night in the death zone. At nearly 29,000 feet, survival without shelter is almost impossible. The two men dug a shallow trench in the snow and huddled together, preparing for what they believed would be their last hours alive. Then, something extraordinary happened. Both climbers reported feeling a third figure present in their snow cave. It was not a hallucination born of fear. They described the presence as tranquil, comforting, and strangely familiar. This invisible compatriot seemed to offer comforting encouragement to focus on surviving until daybreak. The phenomenon is, by now, compared to the third man factor, a mysterious sensation recorded by explorers and climbers in the face of extreme conditions. Called either a trick of the oxygen-starved brain or something outside the realm of scientific inquiry, both Haston and Scott swore that the presence saved them. They were not alone in such experiences. Other Everest climbers have reported the encounter, the presence of unseen figures walking beside them, sounds urging them on when their strength seemed lost. Some call it a guardian angel, while others label it a psychological survival tactic triggered by extreme stress. Whichever it is, the tales evoke a consistent reminder that on Everest, the line between reality and the unknown is as thin as the air. In the death zone, even survival may come with mysteries science cannot fully explain. The Vanishing Snowboarder. In 2001, French snowboarder Marco Siffredi stunned the climbing world by achieving the impossible. He rode a snowboard from the summit of Everest down the treacherous Norton Couloir. It was a feat no one had accomplished before, a descent that combined mountaineering skill with fearless daring. But for Siffredi, this wasn't enough. Obsessed with an even more dangerous challenge, he set his sights on the Hornbeam Couloir, a steeper, riskier route that had never been attempted. 1 year later, against the advice of Sherpas, who warned of bad weather and his own visible exhaustion. He returned to Everest to chase the line he believed would define his legacy. Siffredi's second attempt began well enough. After reaching the summit in September 2002, he strapped on his board and launched into the Hornbane's narrow chute. Witnesses at High Camp saw him carving turns into the slope, disappearing into the distance. But the hours passed, and he never again showed his face. His body was never recovered, nor his snowboard. Some say he fell into a hidden crevasse, while some believe an avalanche carried him away. The truth lies buried on Everest's unforgiving face. What makes Siffredi's haunting is not only the mystery of his disappearance, but also a feeling of ambition left unfinished. There was something extraordinarily done, but even more at risk for something not demanded of him by anyone else. His name survives in the extreme sports community, both as a legend and cautionary tale. Everest remembers not the man who rode it to snowboard down from it, but the man who came into its frozen silence with a snowboard. Over 200 dead bodies, the green boots. Mount Everest is not only the highest peak on Earth, it is also the largest open-air graveyard. More than 200 climbers have lost their lives on its slopes, and many remain where they fell, preserved in the freezing temperatures. In most places, the dead are honored with burials or cremations. On Everest, bodies often become markers along the route. Climbers heading upward pass frozen forms lying in crevasses, leaning against rocks, or curled inside faded sleeping bags. They are stark reminders of the risks and the thin line between ambition and disaster. One of the most infamous is the figure known as Green Boots. Believed to be Indian climber Sawang Paljor, he perished during a storm in 1996. His body, dressed in bright green mountaineering boots, has lain near a limestone cave on the northeast route for decades. For years, every climber heading toward the summit had to step past him, sometimes using the cave itself for shelter. Green Boots became an unintended landmark, a macabre waypoint in the death zone. Though his remains have been moved in recent years, his legend remains fixed in Everest lore. The presence of so many bodies raises difficult questions. Why aren't they retrieved? The truth is that recovery is almost impossible. At such altitudes, even carrying an extra 20 pounds can endanger a climber's life, let alone the weight of a frozen corpse. The dead stay where they fall, turning the world's highest mountain into a place where glory and mortality are permanently intertwined. On Everest, the climb is never just about reaching the top. It's about walking through the silence of those who never made it back. Stick around for our #1 pick. It will change how you see Everest. Rainbow Valley. High on Everest's northern slope lies a place climbers speak of in hushed tones, Rainbow Valley. At first mention, the name sounds cheerful, but the reality is grim. The colors do not come from flowers or light, but from the jackets and gear of climbers who died in the death zone and remain frozen where they fell. Bright reds, blues, and yellows stand out against the endless white, giving the slope a deceptive beauty. Every step through this section is a reminder that beneath those colors are bodies, preserved by the cold for decades. Rainbow Valley is not a single grave, but a stretch of trail where many have collapsed from exhaustion, fallen to injuries, or succumbed to the thin air. The death zone above 8,000 meters allows little margin for error. Oxygen levels are so low that the body begins to shut down. In such conditions, carrying another person, even for a few hundred feet, can mean death for both rescuer and victim. That is why most of the fallen remain where they are, their final resting place on the world's highest slopes. Everest may keep its secrets, but the mysteries never stop pulling us higher. Which story left you thinking the most? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more jaw-dropping discoveries, and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. And now, click the next video on your screen. You won't believe what's waiting there.